Hello and welcome to Thursday's Politics at Jack and Sam's, the podcast for people who may not have been paying entire attention to British politics over the last 12 hours, of which it seems there might be, what do you think, Jack, a few?
One or two, I suspect. Yes, my name is Jack Blanchard of Politico. With me is Sam Coates of Sky News, and if you're listening to this early on Thursday morning, then like me, you probably haven't had very much sleep last night. It is hours after Keir Starmer said he thinks England are going to win the Euros on Sunday. The team is yet to lose a game under his government, and the nation is only interested in one story today, Sam. I'm afraid to say, for you, it ain't politics.
Is it devolution? Is it prison reform?
Hard to say.
Is it restructuring the water companies? Well, we're going to bring you all of those nevertheless. Look, but I have to say, Keir Starmer may well have just produced the most viral moment of his entire premiership because he was sitting in the Oval Office next to the US president, just sitting there predicting that England will win. And then Joe Biden, who may or may not be a good luck symbol, chipped in that football would be coming home because of the Prime Minister. So there's an endorsement and a half. That's a clip that's destined to be played again and again and again, and will either go down as fantastic foresight by a lucky general, or, well, I suspect for most listeners, the alternative is not worth contemplating, particularly if you're living in one of the four nations that Keir Starmer governs. Anyway, on behalf of a weary nation, Jack, what three things can you excite us about today?
OK, the first big thing, of course, Keir Starmer is still in Washington at NATO for the second and final day of the big summit there. But all anyone wants to talk to him about is last night's football result, with England doing the Netherlands 2-1 in the last minute, as I'm sure you already know. Back home, apart from the football, there is a domestic mess for Keir Starmer to worry about, the one that he inherited and one that is getting bigger. We've got various stats and data releases out today. Ofwat are announcing what look like water price bill hikes. There's more GDP stats, which are not going to show the economy is absolutely going gangbusters, or certainly not as much as Keir Starmer wants it to. And we're getting NHS waiting stats out today as well. And as we know, the state the NHS is in. So we'll talk a bit about Keir Starmer's domestic mess, football aside. And of course, we'll do the inevitable 2 minutes on the Tories. Sam, relegated to the bottom of the podcast forevermore. We had a very sad Rishi Sunak, the leader of the opposition, addressing the 1922 committee last night in a rather glum fest for the remaining Tory MPs that didn't lose their seats in the general election, which was just a week ago, Sam. A week ago, we were going to the polls and none of this madness had happened. So much news has happened in the last 7 days. I can barely believe it, but hardly any of it really bigger than the football last night.
So we've been doing 2 minutes on the Tories for several days, and no less than the president of the Liberal Democrats has reached out to point out that if we're doing 2 minutes on the Tories, then pro rata, we have to do 71 seconds on the Liberal Democrats. I don't actually have 71 seconds of material on the Liberal Democrats today. But
could we spend 71 seconds just trying to remember who is the president of the Liberal Democrats? I don't know.
It's Mark Pack, Jack, as you should know. Anyway, shall we start with...
Sorry, Mark.
Hi, Mark. Shall we start with Keir Starmer in Washington and the football? He has said he's going to the final. He has wrapped himself around the England team's success. Jack, is this wise?
He's got no choice. You've just got to go with it. Keir Starmer loves football. Like, this is not like some political nonsense, some posturing. This is not David Cameron forgetting which football team he supports, quote unquote, supports in a press conference. This is not Tony Blair doing headers with Kevin Keegan. Keir Starmer properly is into football. He always has been. He loves Arsenal. He loves the England team. Of course he's going to go to the final. I mean, what's the point in being Prime Minister if you don't bag the ticket and go and watch the final in Berlin on Sunday? He's got no choice but to wrap himself in the flag and go for it. And I have to say, I mean, you're not a football man, Sam. In fact, I don't even know if you watched it last night. Did you watch it last night?
So I went to the O2 to watch The Killers, and halfway through the set, they put on the last few minutes of the football on this gigantic screen, and then the moment that it was clear England had won, they played Mr. Brightside and released all of this ticker tape which came down on everybody. It was absolutely a joyous moment, even for me.
Even you couldn't escape the football, go to watch a gig. Okay, well, but Keir Starmer just has to go with this, and England do have a real chance of winning. Spain, who are playing in the final, are playing much better than England, but England seem to have a winning mentality, the like of which I've never seen England have before. So who knows? Keir Starmer's got to take a punt on it and just go with it, and maybe his run of luck just continues on Sunday, and he can ride this wave all summer. He managed to duck out of the NATO summit somehow yesterday afternoon to see part of the game, and there's footage of him watching England equalise with the penalty. They were 1-0 down and Harry Kane scored. So even then Keir Starmer got lucky. Him and the Dutch PM nip out for 5 minutes and England score, and that moment's caught on camera as well. Then he sat there with Biden, as you say, Biden putting England's success all down to the president, to the new prime minister. So
does that mean George Clooney backed Spain?
Now you're taking too many hoops. I can't actually keep up with that. There are more serious things happening in UK-US relations apart from talking about football, and we should probably talk about that a little bit. There were some really, really important comments from Joe Biden last night. Joe Biden, who, by the way, managed to hold it together during the 3 minutes that reporters sat in on their meeting. At the top of the meeting, my Playbook colleague Stefan Boskia was there. He said Biden did not make any mistakes. He did not seem to forget the Prime Minister's name or any of the other unfortunate things that might have happened. So that story didn't happen. Instead, the story that happened was that Joe Biden crucially praised Keir Starmer's attempts to bring Britain closer to the EU, and the politics of that is really interesting. Biden said, I kind of see you guys as the knot tying the transatlantic alliance together the closer you are with Europe. Now that message is exactly the message that Keir Starmer wants to land. He wants Britain to sign a defence pact with the EU. He wants veterinary deals and other agreements that bring Britain more in alignment with the EU. And there you have the leader of the free world, our closest ally, our most important ally, endorsing that approach. And that is a really big deal for Keir Starmer. And can you imagine, Sam, how different the message would be with Donald Trump in the White House, a man who loves Brexit, a man who hates the EU. And it just goes to show how important November's presidential election is going to be for Keir Starmer.
That's right. All of this is underlined in the last 15 minutes. It's now, 10 to 7 in the morning. The Downing Street has released a statement of the private discussions between Keir Starmer and Joe Biden. And they were at it again. The readout says the president welcomed the Prime Minister's recent comments on establishing closer relationships with our European counterparts. Yeah, energy, climate change, illegal migration, and that military pact. All of those things now seem to be on the table, not necessarily with a legal pact, but something a little bit more informal to kickstart the process seems to be being discussed. That's why Nick Thomas-Symonds is in Washington with the Prime Minister alongside David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, and John Healey, the Defence Secretary. That work already underway. I have to say, it does feel like the emphasis on renewing EU relations is going faster and deeper and wider than I was expecting, given just how reluctant for most of his premiership Keir Starmer has been to talk too much about EU relations.
I think that's partly just a circumstance of the calendar. Starmer didn't choose to be having these big summits within a few days of being Prime Minister. That's just when NATO was in the calendar for, and he's got another one coming up in the subsequent week. The EPC, the European Political Community, is being hosted in Britain, something that was arranged by Rishi Sunak, and again, Starmer's inherited. But he's going to be having these big meetings with all these big European leaders, and this is what his agenda is. And Starmer said, it would normally take months and months to arrange all these different bilateral meetings with all these important leaders. Instead, they're being served up to him on a plate in his first month in number 10, and so he's taking the opportunity. And so even if this wasn't Keir Starmer's very, very top priority for his premiership, he's sort of grabbing the opportunity. And we saw it again yesterday with Germany's Olaf Scholz, who Starmer met for a one-to-one earlier in the day, and again they discussed, quote, according to Downing Street, enhanced defence cooperation. That means working more closely with the EU on all sorts of things. It's not just military, it's cyber defence and it's intelligence sharing, and there are other things that they're just talking about, bringing the two big military powers of Europe, Britain and the EU together in a way that we haven't seen since Britain left in 2020.
There was another big announcement overnight, which is that Keir Starmer signalled that Ukraine can use British weapons to hit military targets in Russia. Now, as I suspect most people know, The UK, like in common with many countries, has been supplying weapons to Ukraine on the basis that it can be used for defensive purposes, because we're not an active participant in the Ukraine war. That circumscribes what we say our weapons can be used if we send them to Ukraine. But there was a big moment earlier in the year when the US did exactly that. Basically, earlier in the year, America said that, basically dropped a ban on the Ukrainian government using their missiles to strike Putin's army inside Russia, albeit for defensive purposes, particularly to protect Kharkiv. Now Keir Starmer has done the same thing, and has it was slightly done in code, but I think diplomatically everybody knew what was going on. He said it's up to the Ukrainians to decide how they use the weapons. And Zelensky has welcomed this with absolutely open arms. He said, "This morning I learned about the permission to use Storm Shadow missiles against military targets in Russian territory. I'm grateful to the UK for its unwavering support." And in equal terms, it's been denounced. The move has been denounced by the Kremlin. A spokesman said that the UK was taking an irresponsible step towards escalating tensions, and Moscow would record all of this and take appropriate measures. That kind of endorsement by President Zelensky for his move will be music to Keir Starmer's ears, particularly as he fights back home on the subject of defence spending, where critics say he's not spending enough, fast enough. But it's a big move. It does drag Britain closer and further into the conflict in Ukraine, which sort of at this point looks as to not have any kind of end. But if he wants to look tough on defence and please an ally and make a move that will be welcomed by NATO fellow leaders, then it seems that is it.
All I would say on that is that I'm not sure it's quite that big a change. Labour might want it to look like they're making a big, bold move. I just note David Cameron, when he was Foreign Secretary, saying that just as Russia is striking inside Ukraine, you can quite understand why Ukraine feels the need to make sure it's defending itself. When he was asked about whether these missiles should be used in that way, I think this has been tacitly been allowed and happening for some time now. If Keir Starmer wants to be a little bit more explicit about this and get a big hug off Zelensky, then fair enough. And that's probably, as you say, very good politics for him. How much difference it makes to where we were in the war a week ago, I'm not entirely sure. But as you say, there's a lot of photo opportunities here for Keir Starmer, and he needs to be seen to be putting Britain as close to Ukraine as Boris Johnson was, as Rishi Sunak was, and it's important to be sending that message to the world as well. It's not just for a domestic audience. That is equally, it's a message to Putin and so on. I think the other thing just to say about NATO before we move on, Sam, is it's just a really interesting moment. If you take two steps back and look at this NATO summit, look at the leaders who are the most important people there. The leaders of Britain, France, Germany, US, Canada are all at this moment either centre or centre-left leaders. And I can't remember the last time that happened. I don't know if that's ever happened in my lifetime. We have this snapshot moment where, despite all the talk about the far right, rightly talking about that, and all the talk about political whirlwinds, the left and the centre-left are having a bit of a moment here in NATO. It's a bit of a love-in with Starmer, Biden, Schultz, and so on. Trudeau will be meeting with Starmer today as well. The problem is that most of these guys are about to get absolutely done in by their voters one after another, and Starmer is going to end up being the last man standing. If you take another snapshot in a year or maybe 2 years or another 3 years, let's see how many of them are still there. But right now, this is a bit of a moment for that sort of politics.
Okay, we've got to do a hell of a lot in about 3 minutes. So let's race through everything on the domestic agenda. Right, tomorrow we are now expecting a big announcement from the Labour government on prisons. Keir Starmer said that the state of the prison system is worse than I thought it was. He said it's pretty shocking that it's been allowed to get into that situation, reckless to allow them to get into that place. We'll be saying more about that in short order. Short order is an announcement by Shabana Mahmood tomorrow that they're going to increase or reduce the amount of time before some offenders can be subject to early release. Alex Chalk, who 8 days ago was the Justice Secretary, has been out on the airwaves admitting that Rishi Sunak blocked exactly this move in order to try and bolster his position in the general election. It will generate criticism from Tories, but it is part of the mess that the Tories have deliberately landed on Keir Starmer's in tray for week one of his premiership.
Yeah, and that's just one of the very messy things back at home that Keir Starmer has inherited, and we're going to get various reminders of them through Thursday. As I say, it's just before 7 o'clock, so we haven't had all this data yet, but we're going to get some sort of announcement from Ofwat today on water bills. They're going to be going up. We understand that is not good news, given there is still a cost of living crisis, not to mention an enormous amount of anger at the bosses of these water companies, given the sewage spills and all the rest of it. We're also getting GDP stats. We know that Keir Starmer has promised big growth. We know Britain is not growing at super fast speeds. He says a few minutes before the GDP stats come out, but we're not expecting them to be going gangbusters. And then NHS stats are coming at 9:30 as well. And again, we know that waiting lists are a massive problem and a massive priority for this government. All big problems and reminders of big problems that Keir Starmer needs to solve. He may be basking in the football result today, but he's got all of this waiting for him at home. And we should say, Sam, just in terms of how the news pans out on people's screens today, Keir Starmer's going to be doing a load of sit-down interviews this afternoon with political editors of all the big broadcasters, including, I'm sure, Sky News. He's going to be doing a press conference in Washington late on Thursday night that probably people will be waking up to on Friday morning, and we'll tell you all about that tomorrow. And you can expect a lot of these domestic problems and issues to come up in these interviews and that press conference once the inevitable questions about England and Ollie Watkins and the Euros are out of the way.
That's right. The announcement to go with all these things today that caught my eye was to go alongside the NHS performance stats. Wes Streeting has announced that he's bringing back one of those government of all the talents figures from Gordon Brown's government, Lord Darzi, Ara Darzi, who Wes Streeting says is going to diagnose the problem with the health service so that he can then solve it. But helpfully, we know what Ara Darzi's diagnosis of the problem of the health service is. Coincidentally, it does chime with exactly what Wes Streeting was talking about in the election campaign, which is the need to integrate better GP services, which are currently a bit like kind of private contractors, into the NHS so that they provide hubs that provide treatment rather than being a kind of outpost that then refer people into the centre. His great criticism of the Blair Brown years of government was that they reformed hospitals but not GPs. So this is the man that's going to provide a blueprint that Wes Streeting is likely to follow to change that part of the NHS. Should we talk about sad Rishi?
2 minutes on the Tories. Sad Rishi Sunak was at the 1922 committee last night, a rather depleted number of MPs before him, apologising for what happened in the election, taking responsibility for it, we are told. We're told he was sorrowful when he made his address. I don't think all the MPs just shouted angrily at him, or at least we haven't had that read out, but it obviously wasn't a jolly meeting. And if you want to feel sorry for Rishi Sunak, according to Sam Blewett, who's written Politico's playbook this morning, Rishi Sunak personally called all 175 Tory MPs who lost their seats in the election over the weekend. Can you imagine sitting down with that list of names and making those phone calls one after another? And how long do you talk to each one for? Like 5 minutes, 10 minutes? This must have taken hours. Can you imagine when you're on like number 80 and you're looking at the list and there's another 90 to go and you're like, oh my God, this is the worst day of my life. But fair play to the Prime Minister. If that's true and he did that, then, you know, I'm sure they will have appreciated that.
The ex-Prime Minister.
Sorry, that's not. I suspect that is not the last time I'm going to do that. Fair play to the leader of the fair play to the interim leader of the opposition. Not exactly sure how we call Rishi Sunak. Anyway, not a jolly few days for him, and just the contrast of him talking to those Tory MPs, the ones who've lost their seats, the ones who are still there but angry, all while Keir Starmer is swanning round the White House, cheering on England and meeting the United States President. I mean, you talk about sliding doors moments. These people's lives have gone in very, very different directions since everybody voted last Thursday.
Even the football seemed to be going worse under Rishi Sunak from the conversations I was overhearing in the office. Look, there's one point about Rishi Sunak worth reflecting on that's worrying Tory MPs, which is we don't know yet the timetable for this leadership election, and it could well go long, maybe even till Christmas. But the question is, at what point does Rishi Sunak stop being leader of the opposition? And there are fears, like particularly if this job is so miserable, he doesn't want to be humiliated so much, that he's just at some point going to quit. Funnily enough, the power to change the dynamic rests still personally with Rishi Sunak. And I was talking to one very senior backbencher who was saying that he was going to go in and tell Rishi Sunak that he'd had all the good bits. Now it was his duty to stay possibly for up to 6 months in order to sort out the Tory party. Whether Rishi Sunak can stomach it, whether he can bear to do that, I don't know. But actually, you can decide all the timetables in the world, but the look of having possibly 2 interim leaders before a permanent leader is horrifying some. So will Rishi Sunak stick it out? That's the question being asked in Tory circles.
All right, I'm going to go off and ponder that while I watch Ollie Watkins' goal about 9 more times on Twitter. So have a wonderful day, Sam. It's been a great day for football fans and non-football fans. And yeah, I'll see you tomorrow morning.
See you there. Bye-bye. Oh, no, we won't.
What?
We won't, because we're having Free Time Fridays. There is not going to be a Politics and Jack and Sam's on a Friday. You can turn up, Jack, but I am going to be in bed.
But who am I going to talk to at 7 o'clock in the morning?
I don't know. Yourself. Okay, we'll see you on Monday. Bye-bye.
See you all on Monday then. Bye-bye.